I'd like to work again, but I'd never been a guy who would sell his soul to get, money or fame.
Everyone was told, from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done. You'll be finished in 3 years.
Epstein Island isn't the only island out there.
3 statements, 3 men, 3 separate moments, months apart in different cities on different stages, and yet they are describing the exact same thing: a system, a war, and a list of names that Hollywood, the media, and the most powerful institutions in the world have spent years and billions of dollars making sure you never see. But here's what nobody is connecting. Jim Caviezel just named the island. Mark Wahlberg is watching his back, and the machine that tried to bury the Passion of the Christ, that tried to strangle Sound of Freedom in its crib, that deployed lawyers and allegations and media silence against anyone who got too close. That machine is now looking at 2 men standing side by side, and for the first time in a very long time, it doesn't know what to do. To understand why Mark Wahlberg is worried, genuinely, privately, deeply worried about Jim Caviezel's safety, you have to understand what Jim Caviezel actually did, not what the headlines said he did, not the version the entertainment press packaged and then quietly buried. What he actually did, because it wasn't just making a movie, it was making the wrong movie at the wrong time, with the wrong people watching, and then refusing to stop talking about what he found. Let's go back to the beginning. Not 2023 when Sound of Freedom hit theaters, not even 2015 when production first began. We have to go back further, back to 2004, back to a film set in Italy, back to the moment Jim Caviezel said yes to a role that the most powerful entertainment industry on earth had decided must not exist.
And there was something otherworldly and childlike going on there in the close-up, and I thought, who's that guy? He's amazing.
Mel Gibson spotted Jim Caviezel in a single close-up from Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line. Something in that frame, a stillness, a quality that directors couldn't name but couldn't ignore, made Gibson stop everything and ask who that man was. He offered Caviezel the role of Jesus Christ in a film that would become The Passion of the Christ. And then his team sat Caviezel down and told him exactly what saying yes would cost.
The moment I took it, the phone stopped ringing.
Not gradually, not over weeks as the project developed. The moment word spread that Jim Caviezel had agreed to play Jesus Christ in Mel Gibson's self-funded, Hollywood-rejected passion project, the calls stopped instantly, completely. This is the first thing you need to understand about how the machine operates. It doesn't send threatening letters. It doesn't hold press conferences. It doesn't publicly blacklist anyone, because that would create a story, and stories create sympathy, and sympathy creates momentum. What it does is silence. Systematic, coordinated, industry-wide silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be organized, because everyone inside the structure already understands the rules. And one of those rules, the most important one, the one that everything else depends on, is this: there are stories that can be told, and there are stories that cannot. And the people who decide which is which are not you. They're not the audience. They're not even the artists. They're the people who control the distribution, the people who control the reviews, the people who decide which films get screened, which get buried, and which get the full weight of institutional promotion behind them. Gibson had already experienced this firsthand. He had already watched every major studio close its doors on The Passion of the Christ before a single frame had screened publicly.
Rupert Murdoch said, he wanted to, and then he said, nah. And then somebody advised him and said he'd be out of business in 5 years.
Read that again slowly. Rupert Murdoch, one of the most powerful media figures in modern history, a man who built an empire on provocation, on controversy, on saying the things that polite institutions wouldn't say, told privately, quietly through back channels that distributing a film about Jesus Christ would end his business in 5 years. That is not a financial warning. That is not a risk assessment. That is a threat delivered by people who had enough institutional leverage to make the threat credible. And it worked. Murdoch walked, every major studio followed, and Gibson was left with a completed film, a destroyed professional network, and a simple choice: absorb the loss or find another way. He found another way: a tiny distribution company, a fax machine, a toothless dog. Handshake deals with theater owners made directly, bypassing every piece of infrastructure Hollywood had spent decades building to ensure that exactly this kind of film would never reach exactly this kind of audience.
Did anyone just see that? Anyone just see what that guy did? Can't let that guy do that again. And
yeah,
we don't want anyone doing that, because it sort of walked around the entire system.
yeah.
$612 million on a $30 million budget. The highest grossing R-rated film in American history. The highest grossing independent film ever made. The highest grossing non-English language film ever made. And Hollywood had to sit there and watch it happen with its hands behind its back, unable to stop it, unable to co-opt it, unable to do anything except quietly file away the lesson and prepare to make sure it never happened again. They filed it away, they prepared, and they waited. Fast forward 20 years, a new film, a new target, and a far more sophisticated version of the same machine. Sound of Freedom was not a surprise project. It was not rushed into production to capitalize on a cultural moment. Jim Caviezel and the team behind it spent 5 full years, getting it from script to screen.
About 4 years ago, we showed the movie. This has been a 5-year deal, and they've done everything they could to stop it, as they did this with Passion of the Christ.
5 years of active, sustained opposition to a film about child trafficking based on documented real-world events, featuring an operator, Tim Ballard, who had personally participated in the rescue of trafficked children through his work with the Department of Homeland Security and Operation Underground Railroad. This is not a political film. This is not a faith-based film in any conventional sense. This is a film about one of the most universally condemned crimes in human history: the buying, selling, and sexual exploitation of children. And Hollywood did not want it to exist. Now ask yourself the question that most mainstream commentators have been carefully, deliberately avoiding. Why? What possible institutional reason does the most powerful entertainment industry on earth have for suppressing a film about child trafficking? Because the standard Hollywood playbook when a socially important film emerges, especially one with this kind of moral clarity, is to co-opt it immediately. Attach the right names, build an awards campaign, put a social justice veneer on the marketing, and take credit for the conversation. They didn't do that with Sound of Freedom. They didn't try to take credit. They tried to take it down.
It's an 8-armed octopus, and if you take just trafficking out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
That is not the language of an actor doing press for a movie. That is the language of someone who has spent years studying a system. Not individual criminal acts, not isolated incidents, not a few bad actors operating in the dark. A system, an interconnected, self-protecting, multi-armed structure that can survive the removal of any individual part because the structure itself remains intact. And when Caviezel started taking that language into public forums, onto Steve Bannon's War Room, onto Jordan Peterson's podcast, onto the Trinity Broadcasting Network, the response from the machine shifted from passive to active, and the first casualty wasn't Caviezel, it was Tim Ballard.
The behavior of Tim Ballard crossed the line, and these women cannot remain silent.
July 2023, Sound of Freedom is in theaters. It is dominating the box office. It is on pace to make $251 million without a single major studio behind it, without mainstream press coverage, without late-night appearances, without morning show segments, and at that exact moment, the precise window of maximum cultural impact, Tim Ballard is removed as CEO of the organization he founded. Multiple misconduct allegations, an independent law firm, a swift conclusion. And then, years later, prosecutors quietly declined to file charges. Insufficient evidence. No trial, no day in court, just the destruction of a reputation, deployed with surgical timing during the exact weeks when that reputation was most dangerous to the people who needed it neutralized.
I would not throw myself in the way of the enemy that's going to remain my children. And my own 3 children, that I love my life so much.
The charges didn't stick. The investigation went nowhere. But the goal was never a conviction. It was never about justice. It was a shutdown, a controlled demolition of momentum at the exact moment that momentum was most threatening to the people who needed it stopped. And Caviezel watched it happen. He watched his collaborator, the man whose real-world operational experience had given Sound of Freedom its credibility, get systematically dismantled in public while the film they'd made together was breaking box office records. He kept talking anyway, and that is exactly why Mark Wahlberg is worried. Mark Wahlberg has survived Hollywood in a way that almost no one else has. He didn't arrive with credentials. He didn't come through the standard pipeline of film school and independent features and careful career management. He came up through one of the most brutal gauntlets in the industry. Public scandal, personal reinvention, decades of deliberate image management, and he did it without ever losing his commercial viability or his insider access. That's not luck. That's someone who understands the rules of this game at a fundamental level. Someone who knows which conversations happen in which rooms, who knows which phone calls never get returned and why, and who knows with the instinctive clarity of a man who has been watching this system from the inside for 30 years when someone is in danger.
I don't want to jam it down anybody's throat, but I do not deny my...
In 2024, Hollywood, Sarkion, where openly Christian public figures are systematically sidelined, where studios greenlight anti-religious content at an industrial pace while treating sincere expressions of faith as a PR liability. And that sentence is not small. That is a declaration of position. That is a man telling you exactly where he stands, knowing full well what it costs. And Wahlberg has been watching what happens to men who stand there. He watched what happened to Gibson after the Passion of the Christ. He watched what happened to Caviezel after Sound of Freedom. He watched what happened to Tim Ballard in real time, during the exact weeks when the film's box office success should have been protecting all of them. And now Wahlberg is doing something that has the industry deeply unsettled. He's pairing back up with Mel Gibson, the two of them together in public on a project called Flight Risk, at this specific moment in time. Because a Gibson-Wahlberg collaboration right now is not just a movie. With the Epstein documents in circulation, with Sound of Freedom's cultural aftershock still reverberating, with Caviezel's statements still living rent-free in the public consciousness, this partnership is a statement. Two men who have survived Hollywood's attempts to sideline them, choosing to stand in the same frame and refusing to pretend the last several years haven't happened. And the machine knows what that means.
Mark Wahlberg calling Hollywood a monster, not metaphorically, not jokingly, as a direct statement of belief from someone who has spent 30 years inside that monster.
That's not a throwaway line from a promotional interview. That is a man who has seen enough, who has been close enough to the center of this thing, to use the word monster and mean it literally. And when a man of Wahlberg's position, with Wahlberg's commercial clout and institutional relationships, starts using that language in public, the question you have to ask is, what has he seen that we haven't? What does someone with 30 years of insider access to the Hollywood power structure know about the people at the top of it that makes the word monster feel not dramatic, but accurate? Because here's what's different about the warning Wahlberg is sending. Caviezel is fearless. Anyone who has watched his interviews knows that. He talks about these systems openly, unapologetically, with the calm of a man who has already made his peace with the consequences. He named the island. He talked about the octopus. He described a structure that goes far deeper than individual trafficking operations. But Wahlberg is not fearless in that same public way. Wahlberg is measured. Wahlberg is calculated. Wahlberg is the kind of man who understands exactly what he's saying and exactly who is listening every single time he opens his mouth in a professional context. So when Mark Wahlberg expresses concern, a private, serious, genuine concern, about the safety of someone who has publicly connected the Epstein network to broader Hollywood power structures, that concern carries a specific weight. It comes from someone who knows how the machine responds, who has watched it respond, who understands the difference between the public version of a takedown and what's actually happening underneath it. Now we arrive at the center of this entire story. The thing that Caviezel said that cannot be unsaid. The claim that, once you hear it, makes every other piece of this puzzle snap into place.
Epstein Island isn't the only island out there.
Let that sit for a moment. The man who made the highest-grossing independent film about child trafficking in American history. The man who worked directly alongside Tim Ballard, a former Department of Homeland Security agent who spent years documenting the operational mechanics of these networks at a tactical level. The man who spent 5 years fighting institutional resistance to get this film made and released, is telling you, plainly directly without hedging, that Epstein's island was not unique. That the structure that built it, funded it, and protected it for decades is still intact. That there are other islands.
Third time, talking in this one particular spot. And I'm thinking, what, did we do something wrong or something? But so then one more time it happened. At the end, I was asking about the movie, and I asked them about that one particular part where everybody's talking, and they all cried out Epstein Island. And I went, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're up against.
Not a journalist, not a political commentator, not a researcher who has spent years studying the Epstein network. A regular audience at a regular screening of Sound of Freedom, spontaneously and repeatedly in the same scene, crying out the name of the most infamous alleged child trafficker in modern American history, because they made the connection themselves, without being told, without a narrator pointing them there. They watched a film about elite-level child trafficking networks, and their minds went, unprompted, repeatedly under the same name. That is not a conspiracy theory spreading through fringe channels. That is an audience processing a truth that the mainstream media has spent years carefully, deliberately avoiding. And Caviezel saw it happen multiple times in multiple cities. Now, in 2026, the Department of Justice has moved forward with mandatory disclosure involving millions of pages of files tied to Epstein's activities, court records, communications, investigative notes, an enormous archive of material that had been sealed or partially hidden for years, material that names names, material that connects dots that the people whose names are in those files have spent years and extraordinary resources keeping disconnected.
And it's disgusting that the media hasn't covered it like they should.
Why wouldn't they cover it? The same media companies that own the entertainment studios, the same conglomerates that control what gets made, what gets distributed, what gets reviewed, and what gets ignored. And the same institutions that looked at a $251 million box office performance and collectively decided the professional thing to do was pretend it didn't exist. This is not incompetence. Incompetence produces inconsistency. What we are describing is consistent, sustained, coordinated. The same pattern repeated across The Passion of the Christ, across Sound of Freedom, across every moment when someone with real credibility and real evidence has gotten gotten close enough to the center of this thing to become dangerous. The pattern is the evidence. And right now, the pattern is pointing directly at Jim Caviezel. Here's a piece of this puzzle that most people are treating as a separate story. It is not a separate story. Keanu Reeves has become one of the most vocal opponents of deep fake technology and unauthorized CGI manipulation in Hollywood. And on the surface, this looks like a labor dispute, an actor protecting his image rights. But look at the timing, look at the context. Dangerous, that's the word. Not admirable, not heroic, dangerous. Because the machine that runs Hollywood, the machine that ran Mel Gibson out of his position after The Passion of the Christ, the machine that neutralized Tim Ballard during Sound of Freedom's peak box office run, the machine that spent 5 years trying to delay and discredit and suppress a film about child trafficking, that machine runs on leverage. It runs on knowing what everyone wants, what everyone fears, what everyone will do to protect what they've built. And Keanu Reeves, across 30 years of industry-defying decisions, has consistently proven that he doesn't have a price. He walked away from Speed 2. He got blacklisted by Fox for a decade. He waited. He didn't grovel. He came back bigger and on his own terms with The Matrix. He gave away portions of his Matrix earnings so the effects team could get bonuses. He took pay cuts so cast members could be paid more. He rides the subway. He gives his lunch to people living on the street. None of it is performative, it's just who he is. And in a system that depends on everyone having something to hide, a man who genuinely has nothing to hide is not just admirable, he's a structural threat. But here's where deep fakes enter this story. Because the machine is adaptive, and when leverage doesn't work, when you can't buy someone, can't threaten them, can't embarrass them, you build the embarrassment yourself. Think about what this technology can do at scale, not to a movie, not to a performance, to a person. This is not hypothetical. This is the logical endpoint of a technology that is already in active use. And Keanu Reeves is standing up and naming it as a problem at the exact moment when the people most threatened by the Epstein disclosures, by the Sound of Freedom cultural wave, by the Gibson-Wahlberg-Caviezel convergence, would have the most to gain from being able to manufacture evidence against their critics. When Caviezel names the island, when Wahlberg calls Hollywood a monster, when Gibson describes a coordinated industry-wide suppression campaign, when Keanu Reeves says this technology is being used as a tool of control, not just for filmmaking, but for narrative management, for reputation destruction, for manufacturing reality itself. These are not four separate stories. This is one story. And the story is about power, about who has it, about how it's maintained, and about what happens to people who get close enough to the truth to start threatening it. Let's talk about what a warning actually looks like in this world. Because it doesn't come the way it does in movies. It doesn't come as a dramatic confrontation, as a direct threat, as a moment of obvious danger that everyone in the room can identify. It comes the way everything comes in Hollywood, quietly, through patterns, through what stops happening as much as through what starts. Phones that were ringing stop ringing, meetings that were scheduled get pushed back, colleagues who were enthusiastic suddenly have competing priorities, projects that were gaining momentum stall out in development, and somewhere, in the background, the machinery of institutional reputation management begins to turn. Jim Caviezel has already seen this once. He watched Tim Ballard go through it in real time. He knows what it looks like. He knows what it means when it starts. And Wahlberg is worried. Not publicly, not dramatically, that's not who he is, but worried in the specific, calculated way of a man who has spent 30 years learning how this machine operates, who knows what it's capable of, and who is watching a man he respects standing directly in its crosshairs with nothing to protect him but the truth he's already spoken.
I'd like to work again, but I've never been a guy who would sell his soul to get, money and fame.
Here's what nobody is connecting. The machine didn't stop The Passion of the Christ. The machine didn't stop Sound of Freedom. The machine didn't stop Gibson from working. It didn't stop Caviezel from talking. It didn't stop Wahlberg from pairing with Gibson again. It didn't stop Keanu from naming the deepfake threat in public. And it hasn't stopped the Epstein documents from reaching the people who are reading them right now. The machine is loud. It has resources and leverage and institutional power, and the ability to manufacture silence on an industrial scale. But it has one weakness that it has never been able to engineer around. Truth that has already been spoken cannot be unspoken. Caviezel already said it. Wahlberg already said it. Gibson already showed the map. And millions of people are already connecting the dots that the most powerful entertainment industry on earth spent years and extraordinary resources trying to keep disconnected. The storm is here, and Hollywood, for all its power, cannot stop what is already in motion.